Outer Orange.
Today we are going over Zorga. So Zorga Nadir did just drop over for Cardfight Vanguard about a day or two ago as of me recording this. I recently took it to my locals just to kind of try out my personal list, and I kind of came up with it. I always do this thing with Zorga where I always come up with a new list like an hour before I actually go and play it. And I don't know why I do this, but it's happened every single time so far. And it's always like I'll start with one list and then I'll completely change it. And it's just something I do. Anyway, this is my Zorga current list, and I'm just gonna say this isn't gospel or anything like that. It'll probably change, and everyone has so many different ways to play Zorga that I'm not going to be like, oh, this is the right way to play it. I honestly don't know what the right way is to play Zorga, because there's just so many different ways you can build this deck out. And I personally went down this route because when I was testing, I found out that if you don't have an order in hand, you are in big trouble. And this deck, this version of it does usually solve that problem. You shouldn't have an issue not finding an order. So let's go ahead and break it down. So first of all, I'm going to do a different thing. In the past, I've just kind of talked about the deck, but I'm just going to break it down card by card here. So we're going to start off with the zero. The zero, this is the ride line. The ride line can be whatever you want it to be. It does not matter, at least for the zero. I actually thought it mattered at first. It doesn't actually matter. This could be whatever you want. But if you're going down the this route, then it does matter. So if you want to play the old ride line, you can, and I actually advise it. Either one is fine. I actually prefer this one because I really like the top 7, and I hate relying on my mulligan being super heavy or order oriented, but that's just my personal playstyle. Some people prefer the other ride line because it does draw you deeper into your deck, which is perfectly understandable. I prefer the top 7, but that's, I guess everyone's different. Anyway, so we have Abyss Fishing. Basically, when you use Robodoll by split, you get to grab a normal order and you get to grab a unit card, and the unit card will go to your drop zone and the order card will go to your hand. I really like this effect because basically you're deck thinning too, and I'm really big into deck thinning, especially in this deck, because if you're checking triggers, you just close out really quickly. It does start a turn later than Rancor Chain does. Rancor Chain is like on ride, you do the thing. This one, you have to ride into the grade 2. Rancor Chain, you have to ride into grade 1. So it is a turn slower in terms of that, but personally, I don't mind. I run Mythiarch, so I don't actually care if I have to start a turn later. It does not bother me because I really like the double deck thing. I just really respect it. I usually personally hit it unless it's like all triggers, which can happen, but because it's pretty, like, it's still pretty early on in the game, you haven't like decked in super hard, you'll usually hit something. And from personal testing, I think I whiffed this once where I only got a unit and I didn't get an order. Like I said, it only happened once, so it was kind of like I hit 2 like every other game that I've played, basically. So it's not the end of the world. This is probably the weakest, or not so great. I really wish this wasn't restricted, but it's restricted. I wish this was Husk, basically, but it's fine. It's kind of the same thing, to be honest. But anyway, the grade 2 going into the grade 3, which is Zorga. You basically get a normal order from dropping it to hand. So the whatever order you decide to play or discard or do whatever between that turn, you can just get back to hand. You can also discard your orders and then get back to hand with his effect, and then you just basically go into Zorga, which is our main dude now. Very strong card. I will say this deck is very strong going first, a lot weaker going second, and that's probably the biggest difference. Now I want to quickly talk about Zorga. Zorga is one of those decks where you can make any of the Zorgas your main Vanguard. This doesn't have to be the go-to now. You can still go back to Mask. You can still go back to Blue. It's okay to do that, and I just want to make that clear. Zorga's always been kind of like that, where you don't have to necessarily play a very specific boss card to make the deck essential. I personally believe that Zorga Mask and this deck are both really good options depending on the meta that you're in. So if you're really interested in playing Zorga Nadir coming up into championships, whatever, I would advise that you read the meta. So by that I mean, if there's a lot of Stride decks and you know Stride decks are going to be performing, you're probably better off playing Nadir. However, if you think the meta is going to be super Divine heavy focused, you're probably better off playing Mask. The reason I say this is Mask performs really pretty good going second, so it can fight into Divine decks that want to go first, and Zorga Nadir performs well going first, so it can fight well into Stride decks. So that's just how I personally visualize it in my brain so far. That's what I've been seeing. That's kind of how it feels like. I will say I personally think Zorga is a little bit more bricky, but now with energy options and maybe with more cards coming out, like festival collection cards, there might be room for Zorga to be stronger. I've talked to some Zorga folks, and there is one guy in particular that really believes that Zorga Mask is actually a really good secondary option. I agree with him. I just haven't personally experimented with Zorga Mask recently, and also I personally don't like the Mask. I just want to break that down before I go into the actual Zorga. I know it's kind of a little off topic, but I think it's important to talk about. But anyway, this is Zorga. Basically, this card is actually, I really like this effect. It says when you play a normal order, you can choose a normal order with a different card name from your bind zone alchemy magic. So what's really cool about this is once you bind an order, you'll basically have that order to work with for the rest of the game. And I really like that because it means if there's a certain order you just really want to play over and over again, or if there's a certain deck you're facing where you need to see a specific order, you'll basically be able to play that order over and over again. Say there you need to be aggressive, so you go into like, I don't know, like this guy for example, and then you just want to keep spamming the Clouded Miasma over and over again. You can, because he's in the bind zone, you can pick him and then you'll just keep doing it. And I think that's really cool. The only downside to this Zorga is that it has to be different card names, which means you can't spam 2 of the same order, and it is a little bit like you have to be a little careful with that aspect because you don't want to, you know, accidentally have 2 of the same order and then now you can't alchemy magic. Honest, the deck is pretty consistent, way more consistent than it has been in the past. You should never really have this issue. I will say when I played, I was so happy to find out I didn't have a single game where I bricked. Like I didn't have like those weird games where I lost just because of the Zorga's pure mechanic of losing. It was really nice that I didn't lose to Zorga's mechanic for once, and that was probably because this distaste towards the deck was if you just don't see your stuff, you just kind of lose randomly, and I just hated that. But this deck is consistent enough to where that shouldn't be an issue. The second effect says you can Energy Blast 2, bind a normal order from drop, so you instantly get your effect, by the way. Choose up to 2 cards from your drop zone called a Rearguard Circle, and they get plus 5k power for each normal order with a different card name in your bind zone. At the end of turn, you retire those cards. This effect is really strong. I actually really underestimated how good this effect is. So first of all, the first effect, let's break that down. Normal order from drop to bind zone. Insane. So basically, if you tutor out an order at any given point in the game, you have access to that order for the rest of the game. It's really awesome. Now the second part of this effect, the two cards from drop, that is an insane effect because it's during main phase where this happens, and that's really important because that means Shadow Cloak goes online, and any toolbox card that you want to play that you want to keep spamming will be basically constantly revived. So if you want to just have a heavy soul charge engine, you can have it. If you want a heavy Shadow Cloak engine where you're constantly bouncing cards, can have it. If you want a way to spam on place abilities, you can have it. You can do it every single turn. You will never not be able to do this. You'll never have not enough energy. You get 3 turns, you'll always have access to this, and I think that's very powerful. On top of the fact that those units also get power, the retire part does not matter. Actually, sometimes it's a good thing that they retire because your opponent will try to target cards on the board, like binding them, whatever. They don't have access to those cards anymore because they're gone. And that's very important, especially if you're playing into cards like we put into decks like Blagmir. Blagmir likes to take your cards and bind them face down, so you don't have access to them for the rest of the game. But guess what? If you play into this correctly and you are careful, you should never have an issue into a deck like that because you can just remove them from the board and they can't touch them anymore. Unless they have a ways to call from drop to the board, but then you can ladder. You know, that's a whole other story. But long story short, very powerful effect, and that 5k is insane because if you call like the specific cards that will stay on the board as the game gets later and later, those cards are going to be massive, be either boosters, you know, rear guards, whatever they're going to be big. So that 5k is pretty nuts at the end. So anyway, now he does have a divine skill on top of that. It's a once per game mechanic, and basically this one says when this unit attacks a grade 3 or greater unit, you can soul blast choose a column and restand all of your rear guards in that column. At the end of the turn, retire them. Again, that retire effect is actually really massive. Again, if you are playing into a deck where you're fearful of your stuff getting lost, you can actually call in a certain way where you can remove your entire board, and then you don't have to worry about your board being touched at all, and you can divine skill under that assumption. And it's actually very important to know when to divine skill. It's a very simple effect, but it's actually very powerful to know when to use it. I would say it's probably one of the most simplest divine skill effects. So on swing, restand something, right? But when you use it does matter. So I've definitely had a couple of games where I was like, I could do it here, but I think it's better I wait, and then for XYZ reason, and it does come up. But long story short, this is very powerful because you're basically restanding a huge column. Usually you want to do this on Persona, but sometimes if you're going second, you may actually just have to do it on your first ride, and it kind of sucks because your columns will be small. But for whatever reason, if your opponent is going to touch your board, which I had happen to me against Vladimir, I was like, oh, they're going to touch my board. I have to divine skill here just so I can remove the cards off the board. It does happen. Or what you can do is you can play it in a different way. Also to Vladimir, we can have a full board, and you can actually choose what you want to retire because Vladimir's effect does say the opponent chooses 2. So your opponent, you choose what 2 are bound. So if you have like 4 cards on the board and say 2 are important, 2 are not important, you just buy the cards that aren't. So long story short, very big knowledge check right there. So just, you know, be cautious. But if you're playing into decks like Youthberg where they bomb deck your stuff, you definitely want to be more cautious of what you're leaving on the board. So stuff like that. But anyway, as this effect, let's talk about the actual deck. So there's a big argument. We're gonna go. This is like part 2 of the discussion of the deck. There's a big argument between running Karma and running Roaming Prison Dragon or RD or RPD. I'm just gonna say RPD from here on out. Basically, they're both cards that give you the access to revive themselves and gain crits and power off themselves. And it's basically just a big back and forth of which one is better, which one is more preferable to run. I think at the end of the day, it comes down to play style. I'll break you down the difference between the two. This one is good for early to mid-grade game aggression, and he is always accessible to you at all times of the game as long as you draw it. And what's nice about him is that he's not restricted to anything but playing orders and alchemy. And this is very powerful because if you're trying to dump your orders as early as possible, if you're trying to go for an aggressive play style, this card just gets insane. And especially with the ride line, you'll usually see it. At least one copy you'll usually find in time, and you'll be able to just, you know, throw down those cards, throw down some boosters, and swing for 20s, 28s, whatever the number is. And it's very aggressive. The downside to this card is it's a 5k. It has no shield on it. Those are very, very bad downsides. Also, the timing of when you alchemagic is pretty different. I personally prefer this card currently in the current build that I'm playing. Maybe in a different build I would prefer the Karma. It just depends on what I'm trying to go for. But I like this because I'm a big Mythiarch enjoyer, and I like spamming Mythiarch. So I'll spam Mythiarch, and usually the dragons will come out. I'll usually get a booster out, and I just go wild. Now, let's talk about Karma real quick. Karma is really good from the other end, that this card can be called when you start your battle zone, your battle phase. So when you start your battle phase, you can call out these copies, and then they get crits, and that's really nice because you can set up your drop, you can set up your board how you want before you go to battle phase, and then these cards will just come out. It also has a first effect that's really good too. It's like a little heavy, but when it's placed on rearguard, you can Energy Blast 4, bind a normal unit, a normal order, which is also really good for your binding, and then he gets plus 5k power for each normal unit, for each normal or bound for that turn in your bind zone. So that's really powerful. So late game, this card gets really big. It gets bigger than Roaming Prison Dragon, which is something to really keep in mind here. This card on its own can easily get to like 30k power, 40k power, and then on top of that, if you stack it with like whatever other effects, it can get even bigger. And then also he gets a crit too if your opponent's on grade 3 or greater. And yeah, he just gets massive. Now the downside to this card is he only gets the crit when your opponent is on grade 3 or greater. So there's something to be very mindful of. You're going first, this card is actually kind of bad. But that's fine because he's good late game. So that's why it's up to you what kind of playstyle you want. If you just play him, you just have to be aware that your grade 3 turn is going to be a little weaker. But you can maximize on this in other ways. You can run other cards that will just fulfill the slot. Some people run the guy that you Soul Blast, bind an order, and bring him out to the board. Instead of playing for him, for this card, you can actually wait on the Karma, play other cards that help make your bind zone huge, and then you can go into the Karma on your Persona turn and go crazy there, and saving your Energy Blast, so that way you have enough to kind of go wild, right? So that's a different approach you can do. It basically changes the flow of when you want to be aggressive versus when you want to hold back. And it's perfectly fine. Like I said, different play styles, and that's perfectly fine. If that's the approach you want to go, then go down that approach, because it does make the Persona effect, like that makes the Divine effect, and the Persona turns a little bit more aggressive if you go down that route. If you basically set up on your first ride and then into your Persona ride, you go crazy. Like I said, it just depends on the meta, and also depends on what you're trying to accomplish with your Zorga deck. So that's basically the difference between the two. I've seen some lists run both at 4 copies, which I think is crazy, by the way. But you can do it. You can cut back on your grade 1s and you can run it. It's very possible. But I will say I don't think running both is the answer, but running, I think, 5 between the both of them is fine. So you can do like 3 and 2 or 2 and 3, whatever you want. I think that's a really good number because then you have 5 targets that can revive themselves. And I do think they kind of play each other a little bit. It's kind of like you're running a 5th copy of one or the other, if that makes sense. So normally in the past, we've always had 4 Roaming Prison Dragons, and that was it. And you just have to hope you find 4. Now you basically have an extra card that you can look for, an extra card you can discard, an extra card that revives itself, an extra card that applies pressure. And I really like that. That's why I like the 5. It's like a 5th copy of basically another version of it, and I like that because they both essentially do the same thing at the end of the game. They both have crit, they both have power, they both call themselves out, right? They're just cards that come out, and that's something really useful because Zorga retires a lot, but it fills up the board very easily, and that's really nice. And these cards basically fulfill that role. So that's how I view them. Now, going into Shadow Cloak, Shadow Cloak is actually insane in this deck. It was already good in the past, but I think now it's like a 4 of. Like, card is just so good now, even more so because of Zorga's revival. So in the past, the blue Zorga revived 1 card, but this revives 2, by the way, and he gets power on top of that. You'll never usually swing with him unless you're going first and you don't have anything in your top. You usually won't be swinging with him, but he does get 5k, and then you can also stack with Zorga's effect, making him a 20k beater. But the main thing is the second effect, because when you play in order, you can Soul Blast, and he gets plus 5k power to the turn. The Alchemagic, choose one of your other rear guards and you return hand. This is an amazing effect now because, like I said, you can revive him and then you can just leave him wherever you want. And then as you're playing all your orders and stuff like that, you can call perfect guards, call out triggers, call out the over trigger, and you can bounce those cards back to hand. And that is massive, by the way. You can double down and actually call double dog and then bounce 2 cards back to hand, which is also massive. You're basically not dying. The only downside to this is if you're reviving a certain way, whatever the revival cards, you usually will be bouncing back. So the power you get off of those, you'll lose. So if you're trying to go down that route, you'll usually lose a little bit of power to increase on defense. Just something kind of keep in mind there. But like I said, this effect is nuts. Also has a first effect: on place from hand, search a deck for an order, reveal it, and then as long as there isn't one in your drop that's the same thing, you just dump it into your drop zone. Also very powerful now, especially since we're binding from the drop zone in a very specific way to kind of set up this. It will also basically set up for the entire turn. So if you basically find one of these early on, you have your alchemy magic set up for the rest of the game, as long as you have one in hand. As long as you have an order in hand. So that's that. So very, very broken card. I used to not care about this card as much in the past because I valued the mask engine a little bit more with what it was doing. It was searching an order that I needed to play in order to set up my order zones and do all this other stuff. So I had to lower Shadow Cloak. But in this build, we're not worrying about mask at all. We're just worrying about having orders in our order zone. So because of that, this card is just superior. This is Kutai. It's a fairy card. I really undervalue this card, and I wasn't running this an hour before I played. And then I put it in last minute because I was like, this card makes a lot of sense. So the reason why it makes a lot of sense is if you are worried about bricking or not having order in hand, this card will always solve your problem. Also, this is a grade 1. You can do it at any given point. So just something to keep in mind. So basically it says when it's placed on graveyard circle, if you did not play an order for this turn, you can discard a card, you can discard an order, search your deck for up to 1 order card that isn't a regular piece, discard it, and then this card can be played from drop. You get any order in your deck to be able to play. It's basically a pseudo Shadow Cloak, but you get to play the card. And then you also get to set it back, and then you can play it again later on. So you basically have extra copies of every single order in your deck. It's very useful. It's very powerful. Definitely recommend it. If you're really playing heavy into this unnatural death approach, you can basically spam this card over and over again. And it's kind of interesting. I'm not as into that approach, but a lot of people play into that approach with the Abolishment Drink, which is a Blitz order that I'm not playing in my deck, you'll notice. I was having a soul issue, so I cut it back. If I find cards that I feel are worth enough running to solve my soul issue, I might go back to running the Blitz order, because that Blitz order is extremely good. I actually love that card. It's one of my favorite cards, and I was very sad that I cut it out of my list. It was originally one of the Nectars, so I cut it out because I was having soul problems. And actually, I played Prison recently, and funnily enough, the Abolishment Drink would have never resolved into that deck because I would have never had soul, because that deck eats your soul and your resources like crazy. But it didn't matter. Even with my resources being cut, the Mythiarchs and this card right here were definitely coming through. They were doing exactly what I wanted. So that was fine. Anyway, so long story short, if you are worried about bricking, this is like a must, and I definitely worry about bricking, so I run this card. You can also just revive it later on, like in the later games with Zorga, and then just have it just be a beater in case you're not seeing your Islanders or whatever. So early on you can use it as a normal card, and then later on you can just use it as a beat stick. So it has like 2 functions, and it basically fulfills everything you need to fulfill in Zorga, which is playing orders, recycling orders, and basically being a booster to then aggro people with. Because you can just call this down and swing with it. You don't care about losing it. You already fulfilled its condition. It'll come back later anyway. So regardless of what you do with this card, it'll be useful to you. 5k shield, cool, it's 5k shield. On the board swinging, it's on the board swinging. It's getting you an order, it's getting you an order. It's basically doing everything you want to do in a card. I really recommend this card if you're trying out this card. So very powerful card. These are just PGs. We're not running the Blitz PG. I don't really value it because of how I play. Since I'm playing for constantly having PGs in my hand or having triggers in my hand, I don't really need the Blitz PG. Because if I see it in the top 7, it's the only PG I see, I can't grab it. For the effect of Mythiarch, I can't put it on the board. I can't, and if it's my drop already, I can't use it. I can't spam PGs, so I don't value the Blitz PG. Not that I'm saying it's bad. It's definitely a really good card. But if I'm playing for the playstyle of bouncing with Shadow Cloak, I really need all 4 of my PGs to be regular PGs. So that's the approach I went down there. Next we have Firelander. This card is insane. Anytime I will say this is the one card where I'm always surprised that people run less of. If you're running it, that's fine. It's the people that don't run it that I'm always surprised by, because this card is good in every aspect. This put in place from hand, top 5 mill card. It could be anything. It could be an order. It could even be a trigger. Like let's say you need shield. You can dump a trigger and then get it back to hand. It's not the most optimal play, but maybe sometimes you need it. What if you've just been seeing PGs, orders, and Persona rides, and you just really need a 20k shield or a 50k shield? Guess what? You can dump it, use Shadow Cloak, use Zorga, revive it, bounce it back with Shadow Cloak, boom, you have shield now. It is extremely useful. This card is nuts, and also the second effect is just insane. It is an 18k beater. When you have 10 or more, you'll get to 10 or more, don't worry. But then it also gets even bigger if you revive it off of Zorga. You have like a huge booster basically either behind Vanguard or behind your roaming prisons. This will make huge numbers. I easily had this have 30k power on it. This was a 38k booster, not even an attacker. It was a booster behind a roaming prison dragon. It was like an 83k column or something like that. I don't remember the exact number, but it was a huge column. Some people really run quadded miasma at higher copies. I like this card. I really hate when people deny me counterblast and I can't do anything about it, and this is definitely one of those cards that can get me in that situation, so I just run it at 1. It's definitely a card you want to see. Like, again, you have multiple ways to get access to it. You can ferry it, you can top 7, maybe you'll find it that way. You can cloak it. You usually will find your one of, so it's not the end of the world if you run it at 1, personally, how I feel like. I also prefer playing lower cost grades. By that I mean 1s and 2s and 0s over a lot of grade 3s, because they can only be activated on grade 3, and I actually like to play orders a turn earlier. Obviously, since I'm running roaming prison dragon, I need more lower cost orders so I can activate them on my grade 1 and grade 2 turn. If I'm having too many grade 3s in my hand, I can't play them, and the worst part is that they're dead shield in my hand too, and if I get cluttered with grade 3 orders, I can't use them and I can't guard with them, so it's a really awkward situation. So that's why I run this at 1. Robodoll is here because obviously we're playing the dragon engine, and you can also bounce back personas, so you can call out a dragon, call persona, bounce back persona, and you're gaming, right? So that's really cool. It gets the dragons out of deck in case you're super breaking, but ideally I just run this to get persona. I have a big problem finding persona with this deck. It is actually a problem. I guess one of Vladimir players I played, I literally never saw persona. I damaged some of them. I was crying. I won the game, but I was sobbing. If I had just saw persona, the game was like closed out, but because I wasn't seeing persona, it's what prolonged the game so long. We were actually almost in deck out mode because of how long it took me to actually ramp up in power, because I just never saw persona. So I was when I got a soul. It was a whole thing, but I got there. We got there. Last but not least, in the grade 3s, we're running the Black Magic. This card is actually really useful. It came up a lot in my games. Even if I had to counterblast 2, I actually didn't really care. This card is actually just really good. The draw 2 goes crazy. You can sometimes you just need the draw, and you just play this card and you just draw, and it's just sometimes you just need it. You just need the draw, and like I said, very useful card. Basically, you're usually drawing into good cards and kind of help your engine going. I really recommend this at 1. Very useful card, especially since you're binding more now. You have more access to binding stuff. You'll usually be able to just draw for free. So yeah, very good card. This card is insane. I also recommend this card. I actually I forgot, like, a long time ago when I was talking about this card, like when it first came out, I was like, oh, you get to do all this crazy stuff, and then no one was playing it obviously at the time because it was just kind of weird. But now it's like really good on top of what it does. Basically, just discard the top of card of your deck and you choose a grade less than or equal to your Vanguard, call it to the board. And then if you if it's a unit card, and if not, you get to just take an order and put your hand. It just can't be hit, but you can just take an order and grab it to your hand. Oh no, I don't have an order. Now I do. Crazy. So you can just set up for your upcoming turn basically, so you don't have to worry about going like, oh my god, I'm out of orders, what am I gonna do? Like, just alchemagic this, and now you have an order again. So very useful card. Highly recommend it. I would even like recommend it at higher copies because it's actually just that good. The only downside is, of course, you have to alchemagic with different card names, so you don't want to go too crazy with like same copy cards. But yeah, it's really good. Next, I run Nectar. A lot of people ask me why in the world I run Nectar. Nectar is the backbone card of when things go wrong. So sometimes you don't have energy blast, you're not finding roaming prison dragons. This is basically the substitute for that. You can actually revive off of Zorga's effect, the grade 2 karma, and then you can alchemagic this with something else and then give the karma the power. So it's like you're pseudo doing it but not actually doing it, and you don't have to worry about the energy. It's a really off case, like rare scenario, but again, another reason I play this card is it has no cost on it. It actually came up that I had a game where I didn't have any damage, and I was like, oh, what do I do here? And I actually alchemagic this with the Mythiarch, which is fine. I gave the power to the booster because I didn't have like a super crazy drop. Basically gave some power to a booster, and then I was also able to just filter my deck with Mythiarch. It wasn't the best thing in the world, but it's better than nothing, right? Like if it was any other card, like say I had a counterblast on it, because I was thinking of running the mill card, I would have been in trouble. It was one of those games where I was barely seeing orders, and my only 2 orders I saw were these 2. And it just happened to happen. But it worked out because, again, I'm just giving power to something, calling it a day. You can't put it on Vanguard, by the way. Just keep that in mind. You can't go on Vanguard. But you can put behind the booster of the Vanguard and up that. Because usually your Vanguard would be the smallest attack. So ideally, you can actually buff up the booster behind Vanguard. And then if you still have your revival cards, the revival cards will just come out and you just kind of do your thing. So that's why I run this. Again, in pseudo really niche situations, if it's super late in the game, I can just stack a dude and make him huge. And then I can even make a column go to all the way to 3 crate if I need to. It won't work on the roaming prison dragons, but it will work on the karma as long as you call it beforehand. So just something to keep. So yeah, very, very funny little side card that you can work with. I really like it. You don't have to run it. I'm still 50-50 on this card. I'm running it for now. Next, we have Mythiarch. I think this card is just insane. Sometimes I see the list without this card. Sometimes I see this with like 2 or 3 copies. Definitely like a 3 of. It could be a 4 of. The only downside to it being a 4 of is, of course, like you don't want to run too many of the same order in case you just only see these 2. Say you like are going through your orders and the only order you see is this card, you're in trouble. Especially if you don't find the dog in time, whatever, it can happen. So it's really risky to run this at 4. If you were to call this card, like basically in top 7, if you find another copy of this, you can actually just bounce back that card. So say you have a bunch of triggers of PGs and you don't need them, you can just grab a copy of this and then just have this add to hand. So again, so you're not in that situation where you're bricking and not having orders in hand. It's very, very useful. So there's that. And then also, if you were to target it, you can do that weird thing where you can choose it, but that like never comes, to be honest. So yeah. There's that. But anyway, long story short, and again, it's a costless order, very free, very useful. I really like this card. I've always liked this card. Ever since this card came out, I was like, oh my god, Zorga's insane. Because you can call a perfect guard off of this and then bounce it with Shadow Cloak. It is just nuts. So very recommended, or just anything. Anything in your deck, you can bounce it back. So personas can come back. So and top 7 is a lot of cards, especially when you're deck thinning through all these effects, like the Shadow Cloak deck thins you, the Ride Line deck thins you, the Firelander deck thins you cards. You will find your pieces, and because you're finding your pieces, your top 7s are gonna be insane. So you're gonna be finding some good stuff. So I highly recommend it. Like I said, it's a deck thin, really, really good card. Next we have the Tongue. I call the Tongue. It's Sweets. Kind of blast draw card, like a top card. You can put on top or discard it. Very insane card, by the way. Ideally, you usually want to alchemagic this last. So if you alchemagic with something, you want this to be the last thing you alchemagic with. So that way you don't ruin your back in case you get something good on top. But the draw is actually nuts. The fact that it basically replaces itself is really good. It is a counter blast, but it's a really decent counter blast. So you draw a card, discard a card, and you stack your deck basically. You choose the discarded stack. Either way, it's good. Last but not least, we have the Overcoming the Unnatural Death. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't use this card at all. In the last like 10 or 12 games I've played on this deck, I haven't used this card at all yet. Not a single time that this card came up, because usually it was a Counter Blast issue or just didn't have 2 cards in my order zone to grab. Like it just never came up. Now I will say, if you're running the drink, this card is like insane, because you can also discard your blitzes and get your blitzes back to hand. So just something to keep in mind. It says order cards, doesn't say which kind. So if you're just crazy on discards, this card grade comes up a lot. If you're playing a mill engine where you're milling cards, you can run the grade 0 order that basically mills cards. I will say this card will have a better presence in there. But my personal issue is I feel like I have to run a heavy amount of orders to make this card to go off. I'm actually thinking about cutting this completely and adding something else in here. I just haven't figured out what yet. But yeah, this card is really good, but it's good under a certain circumstance of what you're trying to accomplish. One of the people that I talked to a lot about, Zorga, he basically spams this card with a Q-Tire. And basically he uses Q-Tire's effect to grab this card, and then he uses this card's effect to basically get his blitzes back to hand. And it's a very insane combo. And also you're binding a lot, which means by the time you ride up to Zorga, you'll have a pretty good bind zone going. And that's also really useful. So that's just something he did. It's a really good approach. You can go down that route. So up to you what you want to do. And that's basically the deck. I talked for about 30 minutes about Zorga. Also, I don't think I talked about triggers, but I do want to quickly talk about the Red OT versus Strot KOT. I think in this deck with this version of Red OT shines stronger. You will usually close out if you check this. I actually forgot to change mine, and I was accidentally running Strot KOT, but I actually had a game, it was my last game, where if I had checked a Red OT in that situation, I actually had game, but I checked the Strot KOT instead, which definitely drew me a ton of cards and healed me and did all that stuff, but I actually would have just closed out the game. It wouldn't have mattered. I recommend the Red OT over the Strot KOT. I will say Strot KOT is also a perfectly viable option. If you can't find the Red OT, you just don't have access to it, whatever. Strot KOT is definitely perfectly fine. It's a 10k crit, draw 2, and heal. Like, it's a really good card. But if you truly, I feel like if you truly want to win and you're really trying to aim to close out, this is definitely the better option. Restanding a 60-something K column that now has like a crit on, that has a crit on it. It's basically the same philosophy as Fennel. You're restanding a column that's swing for 2 damage. And then that column is going to be swing for 100 million. Basically, you usually have game. And if you do this under Divine Skill, holy palooza. You are having the time of your life. I'm just letting you know. So I brought out Abduction and Headhunter just to kind of quickly look over it, but some people really value these cards or play these cards, and I will tell you right now, I don't think either is needed. Now, if there's something that you feel your playstyle needs, where you feel you need to play these cards, I understand. The Headhunter's okay if you're trying to draw a ton off of the Black Magic order, the grade 3 that draws cards, because this will deny you a Counterblast, so it basically makes the order free to take a Counterblast. And also, you know, he is a 13k beater, which is nice. And then this other one is the one where if you, when this unit boost hits a Vanguard, you can buy an order from drop, choose an order from drop, it's okay. I will say I feel it's only good early on, and usually your opponent is guarding your early attacks anyway because they don't want to take a lot of damage. So because of that, I feel this card kind of misses its mark. It has to boost, by the way, and it has to boost the Vanguard, so you can't just drop it down and kind of swing with it type of thing. And then late game, this card becomes absolutely useless. You usually won't even have like any orders in drop, or you'll have very little orders in drop to make this go off. Because usually your orders will already be bound at that point, so you know you're not really getting anything out of it. So I personally don't value this card too high. However, I understand if you're trying to go for the blitzes, because it does pick up anything, so you can pick up blitzes as well. So you can discard cards and pick it back up. But I will say, I think against the right player, they'll know how to play into this, and they'll just play around it. And I'm just not a big fan of that. Also, some people might question why I'm running forefronts. It's just the shield value is just very important. And also your Vanguards already have crits. It is nice to hit crits early though, and I will say the 3/8 split is probably better. I just really value the 20k. I think that's the last thing I have to mention. And I think pure heals is definitely more superior. If you're really worried about crit Vanguards, I guess you can run the crit heal. I don't really like it. I played at 1, and every time it came up, I really needed the 50k shield. This card I actually think is good. My issue is like it's like replacing the cards that are toolboxing my engine, and I just don't want to do that. Also, this deck doesn't have Counterblast issues at all, at least my personal opinion. It does have a little bit of a soul issue. So I actually think soul is more of an issue than Counterblasts are. So personally, if you're trying to play for the Counterblast approach, I don't think you need this card. If you've been playing Zorga for a while, you'll probably know that you actually don't have a Counterblast issue. You usually will have a soul issue though. So if you're really worried about that, you should probably be focusing on cards that amp up your soul. That way you can keep spamming the drinks, or you can use your effects a little bit more easily, all that kind of stuff, because Zorga's Divine Skill is a Soul Blast, Shadow Cloak requires Soul Blast. And also, you know, sometimes you just don't see Persona, so you just run Soul. And also the Ride Line also Soul Blast. So I feel like that is definitely priority. There are a couple cards, I think there's some coming out, that on place give you a soul charge, and then they also get power. That's also an approach you can do. You can also use the crits as a way to control your soul. So you have other options, and I feel like you just don't need the Counterblast stuff as much, especially since there's so many orders that just play for free. I just don't think you need to worry about Counterblast unless you really want to play for Black Magic, which is definitely an approach, and that's ideally what Headhunter is there for. I just feel like running 4 cards for 1 order just isn't worth it, and that's just my personal preference. All right, that's it. I'm done. I'm done talking about Zorga. I just went on a whole spiel. I hope that was a lot of information. I hope that helps you in your deck building or your thoughts on what you're trying to build. Again, I'm just talking from personal experience. Everyone plays Zorga differently. If you know this, you could look at this and go, I don't want to play any of this. That's perfectly fine. You play Zorga how you want to play it. It's a toolbox deck at the end of the day. It has so many different ways to play it. Some people even run Mask in here just to kind of go into a Mask turn to like go that approach. You have so many options. Do whatever makes you happy, you know. But anyway, I'm gonna end it here. 50cards.shop, code orange if you need anything, any of your goodies. This set just dropped, so maybe you may need some of that. Sleeves, over sleeves, whatever you need, deck boxes, he's got that. He's also has other card games as well, so if you're interested in other card games, he's got a bunch of those, and he does sales a lot of times, so yeah, check all that out. 50cards.shop, code orange on that, guys. Like, subscribe, comment. It really helps build my channel and all that stuff. I'm trying to get to 5k. We're getting there slowly but surely. I want to get there before the end of the year, so please hit the subscribe button. It does help a lot. And leave below what deck list you're playing if you're okay with doing that. Feel free to drop your deck logs and all that stuff. I'd love to check out your list for Zorga, Nadir. Anyway, guys, peace out. Das vidania. I'll see you guys in a future video. Bye!